everybody. Welcome back to the Crucial Combo podcast. I am back with my good friend, Don Masenya,
Hi.
ultra businesswoman, real estate professional, and
Oh God.
more. Super mom, all that good stuff.
Oh God.
So,
Okay.
so I appreciate you tapping in on this beautiful Sunday morning. How you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. I had a long day yesterday, so this will be a nice way to wake me up this Sunday morning. Real estate is my main gig, as you know.
All right, I know how you get down. I know how you get down. So, home buyer regret, right?
Yes.
So, since the pandemic, I just want to talk about this not so much from an agent perspective, more just regular people. During the pandemic, we had a lot of people buy. Interest rates were really low, right? And the energy, it was electric. Everybody was like,
Oh
yeah, I'm gonna go buy this house and
yeah.
I'll give you my the coat off my back and plus fifty
Firstborn
thousand
kid.
dollars.
Yeah.
Whatever I gotta do. What can I do to get this house?
Yeah.
So people really went through what they needed to do to get in the house, and now you have people who are regretful of buying a home because of things like the taxes or the maintenance and things have kind of hit people to a point where they're like, damn, should I have bought this house? And I just wanted to get your perspective on that, whether you've seen any of that. Obviously people aren't going to call you and say, hey, Don, I regret doing this transaction. But
Sometimes.
But so what do you think about that as far as particularly since the pandemic? What do you think about the regret?
See, that's interesting because I don't typically. So I usually get regret the first 6 months to a year.
Okay.
And the reason for that is you're in a new home and now all of a sudden the unexpected expenses start to incur, right? So
Hmm.
people are usually really mad. They just put all this money into this home and then now you have to, so now you have, water in your basement. Now
Hmm.
you have all of these new scary things that you've never had to deal with.
Hmm.
I don't know how that's been exasperated since the pandemic.
Hmm.
I don't necessarily feel like it's that much more different than the normal course that people go through as far as just being a new homeowner, right? And all
Right.
of the anxieties that come with that. I always see the difference, right? So the first year and a half, a buyer or now a new owner has to get their sea legs. You're going to have stuff happen with your house and you're going to have to handle it. You've never had to handle it before because you lived in an apartment and everything was taken care of for you. So
Right.
now you have to handle it. So that's a natural thing that's always been ongoing. Um, I found the opposite to be true, which is you're in a house at 3%. You're not paying $2,500 in rent, right? You own your home. You have stuff that you can do um, to the house without asking anybody for it. So I found that to be consistent for people that bought during the pandemic. I think people that bought during the pandemic that maybe um, and again, the Northeast is a different place, right? People that bought during the pandemic that maybe bought were aggressive because they were in a multiple offer situation. If at some point they felt as though they overpaid for the house, the equity very quickly overtook that, and the gains are obvious. And
Well,
also,
that's what I'm getting at. Yeah, it's the house poor. It's the house poor thing that people did buy at the top of the market, and I'm gonna let you finish your thought. I just wanted to say that that's kind of what I'm speaking on. Is that whole they do have a low interest rate, which I think is a positive.
mhm.
They did buy it over inflated prices in some scenarios, right? And they're quote unquote house poor. They can't move if they wanted to move because obviously they'd be in a whole nother scenario if they tried to move and buy something new. But please go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, that's the interesting thing about being house poor. I think you could have been house poor in any environment if you didn't do the math for yourself properly. The mortgage is supposed to tell you this is what we're willing to qualify you for, and then you have to determine, all right, after you bought the house, did you add a bunch of new expenses? Did you put on a bunch of extra debt after you bought the house because you're in the house now and you don't have a mortgage person telling you don't buy a car. You don't have a mortgage person telling you, or a real estate agent telling you don't add any more debt, right? To your DTI because you're not going to qualify. Now you're in your house. What did you do after you got in your house? Did you get solar panels that you now have to pay for? Did you get new windows that you now have to pay for? Or did you make decisions that aggravated your monthly expenses all of a
Yeah.
sudden? So I think it's on a case by case basis. Being house poor Can also happen if you're renting an apartment to the tune of $3,000 a month, right? And then you're aggravating or you're reducing your chances of buying a house in the first place if you don't have the capacity to save. So
Right.
that, to me, I'll be honest, is not a scenario that I've heard a lot of, people feeling house poor in a unique way at this time. I think that that's always been the case if you generally don't make the right decisions after you buy a house, or if you really underestimated or overestimated your ability to be handy around a house that's going to need you to dig in. Like if you're the type of person that something goes wrong and you lose your mind, like, oh, we got gypped, the seller didn't tell us that, if you're that type of person, everything is going to be painful as far as home ownership is concerned.
From what I understand, it shouldn't even be, your mortgage payment shouldn't even be more than 40% of your income. Really should be hopefully around 35%. Well, in some cases, they push that thing up to 50% sometimes as far as qualifying for the loan, right? So they may say, hey, you can afford this amount, and it's based on, they don't even give the buyer this percentage to look at. They just say, hey, you can afford this. And the buyer will say, okay, cool, I'm going to go buy this because I can afford this payment, or I can afford this quote unquote amount for the house, 400,000, whatever. And they go buy the house, and like you said, they're not thinking about maintenance of the lawn. They're not thinking about leaks in the roof, whatever it is. And if you're not handy and you have to pay somebody every time something needs to be done, look, that's part of being an adult. It's part of stuff that happens when you own something. It's just is what it is. But there's a lot of people who are complaining now. They're like, man, I want to go back to renting. I wish I missed the day. I'm not going to pull it up here, but there was a video of a woman saying, man, I missed the days of renting. I could just call the fix-it guy and he could just come and fix it, and I didn't have to deal with any of that. But at the same time, when you have that, you really are just paying for the convenience of that, and you don't get to own it in the end. So
it becomes very expensive if after 30 years you don't have assets, real estate assets, which are the number one vehicle for the average American of building wealth. It becomes very expensive later on in life to have not acquired any real estate.
Yes.
So you're going to be paying someone else's mortgage, right? If you live in a building or someone else's home, you are paying someone else's mortgage for the convenience of it. But as far as retirement planning, if real estate is not part of that calculation, you're going to hurt yourself. From a lifestyle perspective, home ownership has so many advantages. There's laundry list of reasons why home ownership is fulfilling, but you have to understand it as a long game, right? You have to understand it as just like anything else. You have to care for it. It is going to require you to really dig in. And if you don't understand that, and if you are constantly blaming the seller for this and for that, you're not really taking responsibility as a home owner of understanding that this is now your baby, right? And all of the benefits and advantages outweigh all of the stress and strife.
100%.
Once you get through these bigger things or even the smaller things, you can literally live anywhere, and you don't have this mindset of, oh, I wish I could go back to renting. If you are that type of person, that where renting is better for you, it's at a huge cost, right? For you in the long run.
It's at a huge cost, and it's very short-sighted. You know what I mean?
It is.
I wanted to. I'm gonna see if I can pull up or clip in this video. There's a guy. What's his name? His name is he's a multi-millionaire investor, Ramit Sethi. So I reviewed one of his videos. So him, Grant Cardone, a lot of other guys who are super super rich have talked about this. Buying a home is the most, not irresponsible. It's not the smartest thing to do from an economic standpoint for the average person. And it's just, to me, it's crazy. And I'm not speaking as a realtor. I'm just speaking.
No, it's a huge lie.
It's a huge lie. And you know what it is? The thing I don't like about that narrative is that, for me, this pod is all about the nuance and context. I think context is always important when you start to throw out something like that.
Change your mindset around renting. The first thing I want you to do is to accept the fact that, yes, renting can make financial sense in a lot of cases. And if you're going to truly use this video to come to the right decision, I want you to understand why. People do not like to even think that renting can be a good financial decision because we have been told renting is throwing your money away. Let me break down 3 common housing myths for you so we can get to the truth. Myth: renting a house means you're just paying your landlord's mortgage. All right, let me explain how people think landlords operate. They think a landlord owns a place that costs them $1,000 a month. So they go, $1,000 a month. Let me add on 10% for profit. They're paying my mortgage. I get to go on vacation because of my tenants. Listen, your landlord can only charge you what the market will bear. They cannot simply take whatever they bought, add on a profit margin, and go, if they could do that, why would they stop at 5% or 10%? Why wouldn't they go to 15 or 100%? The answer is they can't simply charge you whatever they want. Sometimes landlords make a profit. Sometimes they lose money. A lot of times they don't even know how much their costs actually are. Please stop thinking of landlords as these omniscient observers who know all their numbers. No, you don't even know how much that roof repair costs you. You don't know how to amortize that over 11 years. You're just charging whatever the market will bear. And if they don't like it, if there's 1 month of vacancy, wiping out your entire year's profit, they go, oh, it's so hard. Oh, government, protect me. This myth has led to so many people rushing into a house because they think someone else is getting the better end of a bargain. Myth: if you're paying rent, you're throwing money away. Well, I like to have a little fun with this topic, so I posted a question on Twitter. I said, hey, I spent $30 on dinner in New York. Great food, great service. I plan to go back. Did I throw money away on dinner? Wouldn't you know, 95% of people said, no, Ramit, that sounds like great. Then I said, hey, I spent X $1,000 renting an apartment last month in New York. And for the last 10 years, good location, good views, good roof. I plan to keep renting. Did I throw money away? Notice this time, it wasn't 95%. It was only 81% who said no. In other words, 19% of people said, you threw money away. What do you notice? Virtually everyone agreed that when I paid for dinner, it was worth it. But when I said I rented an apartment, suddenly 19% of people thought that I threw money away on rent. But I'm not throwing money away on rent. I'm paying for a roof over my head. I'm paying for a great view. I'm paying for somebody to fix issues so that I don't ever have to go to Home Depot in my life. That's a rich life. When you pay rent, you are paying for value. When you go to a restaurant, you are paying for value, the value of knowledge of cooking, the dishes, someone to clean the dishes and serve. The same concept applies when you pay for essentially anything. You're not throwing money away on rent, just as you're not throwing money away at your local restaurant. Myth: you need to buy a house because you're building equity. In America, there's a magic word. It doesn't matter how much. It doesn't matter how to get it. We don't understand anything about it, but we love it. And it's called equity. I get a lot of criticism because people think I ignore equity. I don't ignore equity. I actually understand it. Now, yes, it is true that you can build equity with a house, but it actually takes a long time. And there's a phrase in real estate: don't pay a dollar to make a dime. Let's assume that you have a 30-year mortgage at $1.59 million at 7% interest. Look at this amortization table, something that 99.999% of Americans have never even heard of. This is showing you how much you are paying in principal, in other words, equity, versus interest on your loan. You can see that it takes 21 years for you to start paying more towards principal than to interest. So we might actually say, I don't want to waste money on interest. Do you see how ridiculous these myths are? By the way, I'll link the amortization calculator in the description for you. You should put your own numbers in there and play around. You're going to be shocked.
Okay, so I wanted to just
Exhausting, and my anxiety watching oh, my anxiety just goes through the roof.
I've ran across some of his videos, but I've heard Grant Cardone say this before. I've watched stuff on Grant Cardone, which I know him a little bit more as far as real estate, but
Yeah. Oh, it was obnoxious. It was obnoxious and a complete lie. You have to go to specific professionals for specific things.
right.
So if he's saying don't buy a home in order to build equity, and then he references multi-million-dollar properties, right? That's a 1% of the population that could even speak that language. Why
Sure.
didn't he use the average example? The reason he didn't use the average example, right, of the average home value is because he is speaking in extremes about a subject matter he probably doesn't care that much about.
Right.
I would love for him to talk about why it is that the way in which the average family builds wealth is through real estate. Why is the history of that wrong?
Right. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely
Why,
right.
I want to hear them talk about that, right? Because that's a fact that the average American, the average family only builds real estate in this way. If what you're saying is don't throw your money into your home, do this instead. I'm curious to hear what the this instead is,
Well,
and whether
now when you say now, I wanted to cut you right there because he in another video, I did a reaction video on him for another video, same subject, and what he was saying is that his argument was that rather than paying more, so he did the two scenarios where he took the housing expense, the mortgage, and the rent, and in some scenarios, as we know, in some scenarios it's cheaper to rent than it
right.
is to buy. It depends on where you're at. So his argument was that, okay, instead of spending money on mortgage where you're not building any equity, you're not putting anything towards the equity for a set amount of years, 15 years or so, take that extra money and put it in. I could put the money in the stock market or XYZ.
Stupid.
So, it's stupid in context, right? Because the whole issue is this: someone who wants to invest in anything else, let's say the stock market, they want to put money in equities or they want to put money in crypto or whatever it is going to invest anyway, right? And that's my point of view. No one is going to invest because they're renting instead of buying.
Well, what he's saying is you have extra money when you're renting, and you can put that extra money into some of these other investment endeavors,
Sure,
right?
sure.
That
That's hard.
are highly risky for the average person,
Well,
right?
you know what? Let's say you're talking about something that's even less risky, like a mutual fund or whatever. But my argument was that, look, that's not going to make someone invest who isn't poised to invest.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying, renting versus buying, and that's what a lot of these guys do is they'll give you the perspective from a multimillionaire who may be renting multiple places, which may make sense for them because they don't necessarily need to buy a home. And I'm not saying they don't have family, but they don't need to buy a home like the average. Just getting back to your point, the average person.
Yes.
In the other video, I said, you know, let's get back to why people buy the home in the first place. One of the main reasons why I think most people push to buy a home is because of children.
There's so many things. Your mortgage doesn't go up unless your taxes go up drastically. Your
Right.
rent is going to go up over the 30 years. We're talking about the cheapest debt that any bank will ever offer you is a mortgage. That's the cheapest debt. So he's basically saying, say no to the cheapest debt because it's going to take you 30 years. The average person needs slow, cumbersome, big investment vehicles.
Right.
A mortgage is one of those things. The average person should not be playing around in the stock market.
Right.
I'm not saying it's impossible to do so, but there's a reason why there's only 4% of people that trade stocks that actually make money, right?
Right.
So when you understand those numbers and someone is telling you, right, do this instead, you have to be very, very careful in understanding, am I an average person? Do I have average earnings? Am I an average learner? Do I have the acumen? Do I have the intestinal fortitude to make these investments, or do I not? If I do not, you absolutely should buy a home and sit on it for 30 years. Absolutely, without question. I don't know a single person that's bought a home and sat in it for 30 years and then decided that they wanted to downside that hated that. I don't.
Right.
My clients that are older, that are downsizing, that are moving out of the state, none of them say this was a bad idea.
Right.
I should not have done this, right? I should have taken this money out earlier and had some, taken education on stock market or mutual, whatever the case may be. This I should not have done. That's ridiculous.
But it's not one or the other. You know what I'm saying?
And it's not one or the other.
It's weird to me to hear someone say that, well, instead you could rent and then do this. You could buy and then do that, this or that.
But what he's saying is you don't have the extra money, right? So if the difference between renting and buying is $500 a month, right? Or $1,000 a month, invest that $1,000. And I'm not necessarily saying that you shouldn't do that if you right now can are sitting in an apartment. And it also depends on the situation. If you're a 22-year-old sitting in an apartment and you can stomach living in an apartment that's not as nice as what you can currently afford, let's say you have a good job, a 22-year-old should start investing in stocks. The average 22-year-old, I'm not saying people should not look into these things at all. I'm not saying that. But the idea that real estate is not, in my opinion, the safest advice that you can give the average person, I think is a complete lie. People don't have the psychological relationship with money that would make me encourage them not to invest in real estate. They just don't. There's certain psychological elements of money and how to handle money that people don't realize you have to have if you're investing in some of these more creative ways. You have to train your mind. There's just so many reasons, right?
Well,
Why?
you're absolutely right. And that's why if you're not an astute investor and you want to do the basics, I mean, that's why you can do the 401k, you can invest into your 401k through your job very easy. The most basic stuff, you don't see it, the money's already taken out if that's what you're doing if you're a W-2 employee. And they invest in mutual funds. I mean, these are things that are basically generally pretty safe. They're not risky. They're things you can do over a long period of time. It's almost a mortgage version of investing, right?
Right.
As far as outside of buying a home. It's the
Right.
mortgage version of it. You work somewhere 20 years and you have something taken out every month, and then they match you every time you put something in there. I mean, or if you want to do an IRA or whatever the case is. But this idea that I agree with you. If you're young, you can live in an apartment, you have no kids, you can live in a studio apartment. Yeah, maybe you take your money and you put it in something else, a business or whatever you want to do. But I don't think they should be juxtaposed to a home. I don't think those two
But I
things
think
should be opposite.
his argument is the reason it is because the overwhelming expenses of owning a home you're going to lose the opportunity of using that additional money for this other thing, right? That's what he's basically saying. He's saying, no, it's way more expensive, right, to own the home, and it actually will prevent you from making these other investments.
Well,
That's
I agree with him. I agree with him. The problem is, he doesn't put in context, and that's the problem. Is that if you're 22 or whatever age you are, if you're single and you don't need a home, then that makes sense because then you don't have the reason to necessarily do it right now for your life, right?
right.
But if you're a family, you know what I mean? Whether you're a small family of two or a family of 5 or 6, it does make sense because at the end of the day, like you said, 30 years from now, when you pass, your kid at least has the home. On top
Right.
of insurance, God willing, you have insurance, your kid at least has the home. Or
Right.
when you retire, at least you can downsize, you have something to sell.
But what
You know what
about
I'm
those
saying?
30 years, right? The quality of life of owning a home in those 30 years, right?
Right.
The psychological impact of children who are raised in homes that are theirs, right?
Right.
Not having to fight with a new landlord that has taken over the property and maybe their maintenance is just not that great. We're not talking luxury buildings here. Luxury buildings are always going to be run well, but the
Yep.
average person isn't necessarily sitting in a luxury building that's going to be run well. What about the aggravation of arguing with your, landlord about things that need to be maintenance, right?
Right.
You got rats and rodents potentially. There's so many quality of life issues over 30 years that are solved by owning a home, as difficult as owning a home is. And he completely doesn't talk about that because he gets to live wherever, however he wants to live.
Right.
You do
Right.
not. You don't get to
Exactly.
go to a different apartment tomorrow. You have to
Right.
go back to that same apartment. You don't get to
Listen.
do any of the things that these men are doing. You don't get to do those things.
Well, not to mention if the house is being sold and you get notice to vacate. So you might not even be there 30 years. Even if you wanted to be there 30 years, the point is you don't have the choice to be there 30 years because
Right.
it's yours. Someone could tell you
Right.
you could have been living there for 10 years, 15 years, and you really feel like this is home. This is where I've been raising my kids. And next thing you know, hey, I'm selling the building. Y'all got to go.
Right.
And that's traumatic to I had a client like that one time, a renter client, and she was so used to being there that, and the landlord lived on the premises with her, you know what I'm saying? And so the landlord gave her unlimited access to the backyard. She was barbecuing, and that was her, like, her yard, even though she didn't own
Hmm.
it. Landlord was single. The landlord didn't use the yard, point is.
Right.
So it felt like her property. But when that landlord sold the property, it's like the carpet is pulled from under you, and that's a very
Absolutely.
uncomfortable feeling. Not to mention you can't make any modifications, you can't do anything you
Or you
want,
can make the modifications and they're not yours. You can make
and they're
improvements and they're
not
not
yours.
yours. So there's so
Right.
many reasons why that's just a fault. Like his whole thing is just false. And I'll be honest with you, just like from watching him, the way he's kind of expressing himself, I am always curious to see, okay, well, what are you selling? You know, is this an ego boost for you? You know, because is the like what's the rationale behind
Right.
telling people that they shouldn't be homeowners? Uh, Using a vehicle that has worked for centuries and centuries for people. I'm not saying that there isn't a sliver of people that his methodology wouldn't work for, but the average person is going to fail if this is what they end up doing.
Well, here's the question though. The question, I always look at it like this. Would I give my kids that advice? No. I wouldn't
No,
give my kids that advice. So
right,
you always got to look at it and say, the people you love the most, would you give them that advice?
right.
And there's a simple way to answer that question when you put it in that context.
Yeah.
I think that the motivation, to be honest with you, is I think that the motivation is to rent properties. Typically, you're getting that information from people who own units,
Yeah,
tons of doors. And, it's a fair game. We live in a fair, free market, and it is what it is. But I do think that I wouldn't give that advice to people, realtor or not realtor. It just doesn't make sense. And America is becoming a nation of renters.
oof.
I think that that's happening for different reasons. But if you're someone who doesn't want to buy and you just want to rent, that's fine. It's always going to be people who rent, and there's always a reason for people to rent. But to put a blanket statement out there telling people that buying a house is a bad decision, buying a house is never a bad decision if you want a house, you understand why you're getting a house, and you understand the benefits of what they'll be to you. It's never a bad
Prepared,
decision.
and you're
Yeah,
prepared to take
and
care
you're
of it. Yeah.
prepared. When you put that out without context, to me, it's just dangerous,
So he went
literally.
through all the benefits of renting, right? To say, you know how he did that whole thing of, oh, I went to a restaurant and basically saying when you rent, you're getting value from that. Of course, you're getting value from that, but
Right.
you're getting drastically less value from it than I am in my home, right?
Oh man, forget about
You
it.
not having a yard, you not having like there's so many
Forget
things that
about
I
it.
can say are different between renting and home ownership. The
Yeah.
reward of home ownership completely outweigh, and
Way,
I wish he would have
way good.
broken that down also. That's how you know this is a very one-sided self-indulgent argument.
Right.
It doesn't make sense for many reasons.
Yeah. I mean, there's a narrative he wanted to push, and he's not the only one. He's just an example. But when people
Hmm.
do that, I'm like, what's your real push? Because
Right.
there's no way you can ever make that. In my opinion, you can't make that argument that it's always better to rent. To put it in that perspective is just off to me. You know what I'm
Well, I
saying?
want to know what's at the end of what is he selling at the end of what does he sell? If he's a millionaire outside of real estate, and he probably is a landlord many times over, interestingly,
Probably.
right? So
Probably.
he's renting in New York, but it is very likely that he is a landlord taking
You know
advantage
he's
of
a
the very
landlord.
system. It's very likely.
Right.
But what is the purpose of that one video? Is it to sell books? Right? Because that's really easy. You write a book, all I got to do is promote it. How do I promote it? I want to guide you away from whatever it is I want you to guide you away from, and invest in this thing and sell this book or sell my seminars. I want to become wildly popular in these
Oh,
kind of ways.
he has a show actually. It's called How to Get Rich. It was on Netflix. I
Yeah,
put the
I want to
link
know
to that.
how he wants everyone to get rich.
Well, here's the thing. Like I said, I mean, I don't think there's a problem with looking at, okay, how do I become rich and how to stack money. I don't think there's a problem with that. I don't think you should ever insert the idea that buying a home is in any way going to be an impediment to becoming rich. That is just too weird. If you're making the wrong decision at the wrong time that you can't afford, sure, that's just a bad decision. It's just
Yeah.
like buying an expensive car.
Yeah.
But the idea of home ownership ever being an impediment or a problem to get you the way you want to go financially is just off, off,
Right.
off. You know, I'm gonna talk about another video about cars. A car may be something that is something that is definitely an impediment to people doing things financially. But
Yeah.
that's another video. But I don't think a home ever is, and I think
I
that
agree.
it's dangerous when you do that, because my attitude is that, look, if you want to put more money in something else, as far as stocks or crypto or whatever, any other investment strategy, if you don't have the money, get another job, get another hustle, find another way to increase your income so you can start investing. That's
Right.
always an option. But don't put yourself in a scenario where you're gonna take on this mindset.
Mindset.
I'm gonna rent because I'm gonna have extra money. Because you may not. You may get hit tomorrow that you gotta move. Now you gotta come up with money to move.
Right.
And then you may go in, and here's the other thing too, we don't talk about enough. You might have been renting it, let's just say, $1,500 a month for the last 10, 15 years. Now you gotta go because you don't have an option because that place you're living at is being sold. Now you get out into the free market. Damn. Now the same apartment that I'm used to paying $1,500 for is now $2,200.
Yeah.
Now I got to come up with $700 more a month because that's where the market is now.
Right.
I don't have this sweet deal that I had before. So, you know,
No, it's a very out of touch approach to sell a book or whatever it is that he's selling. And I think
yeah,
people need to kind of realize that, because you're really asking people to do something really easy, right? What you've been doing. What you've been doing
right,
is renting. So
right,
what you're saying is, hey, you don't need to do this hard thing. Buying a house is hard. You don't need to do this hard thing of buying a house. It's
right,
not all it's cut out to be. Do this other thing that's in my book that you should buy.
right. So I can keep renting to you.
So I can keep renting to you.
so, I, so I can keep getting your rent money
Please.
while I'm putting my money into everything else. You know what I mean? Ownership is never going to be a bad decision. And I think, just to cap this particular thing off, this idea that you don't own the house, the bank owns the house, that's not what it is. The bank is
Not at all.
giving you a loan. The bank has a lien on the house. You pay your mortgage because you don't have $450,000 in
Nope.
cash to buy your house right
But
now.
it's
So it's
your
just that simple.
house.
But
It
it's
is
still
your
your house.
house.
It's still your house as long as you pay for it, and it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking a loan for a particular reason, right? And ultimately, you have this home that you can do something down the line with, and it doesn't have to be in 30 years. You can sell the home before if the equity is up, or whether the equity's not up. You have the option to sell the home. So
Yeah.
we got to get rid of that
And the
that
profits don't go to the bank,
and the profits don't
because
go
the
to
bank doesn't own the home.
right.
The
The
bank is
bank is
not
giving you a
swimming in
loan.
your pool. The bank is not playing in the backyard. No.
Yeah.
You are enjoying way more benefits from this investment than you would if you were renting.
1,000%. I know that you're a Kamala supporter, and I understand, so we're not going
Yes.
to get super political here. That being said, in relation to housing, she did put out a proposed economic policy. I don't want to go over the whole policy per se, but just the parts that relate to real estate. We do obviously have a housing shortage, right? We all know that. So the two things that are in her policy are, one, she wants to provide 25,000 to every first-time home buyer. I don't necessarily think that's a good idea, because I think that, one, we don't know where the money's coming from. That's the one issue. And I think it's going to just inflate the prices even more. That's one proposal. And then the other proposal is to build, I believe, 3 million new homes within the first term.
Okay.
Government is going to build the homes. So I don't know how that's going to be done. I don't think that's a good idea, because I don't know where the money's coming from. So these are the two things that she's proposed in relation to real estate.
Well, just like anything else, we have to kind of figure out. I don't know that we can talk about this without really understanding what the proposal is. Is there a cap on who qualifies for this? Usually there is, right? So someone like you or I may or may not qualify for this. Is there a prepayment that you have to do over time? To your point, there's so many things that we have to understand about. And this is why politics for me becomes frustrating to talk about, because we kind of take the one line and we have no idea what how the actual policy is going to go into effect. There currently already are a lot of government assisting programs, right?
Right.
That could give you up to $25,000 that already exist.
Right.
What I can tell you is usually when the government is offering these programs, they're hard to qualify for. They're hard to get. So
Right.
I'm not as worried about it because I know it's going to be virtually impossible to get that $25,000 anyways.
Right.
So,
Well,
but
no, that was the whole point. So, again, I don't want to. It's not so much to do a back and forth about supporting her or not supporting her. I think that the government can't solve the housing issues that way. So
but
this
they
is something
can,
that
and they have made it they've made it affordable for people that otherwise could not afford a home to do so. They have put a lot of things in place, particularly in um, communities of color, that make it easier and affordable for us to catch up. So again, without knowing the details of the actual policy, and this is again why I don't like to talk about politics as it relates to real estate without understanding the specifics of the policy. But I know that by and large, many government-backed programs are very difficult to qualify for. And the people that generally get them are people that have proven that they have absolutely nothing, right? So in those scenarios, I'm not that worried about it because I know that in our market, many of those loans are not going to be closed. The second you tell a seller, I have the Kamala incentive, whatever, the seller is going to say, I don't want to deal with someone who's financing along with this particular program because it's going to take longer to close. And I know it's going to take forever for you to qualify. And do you have to take a bunch of classes? And am I going to have additional inspections? So I don't think that, these programs are new. First of all, they're not new. And second of all, it's going to fall into the same category of it just being harder, right?
Well, that was the whole argument. The whole argument was, all the economists who looked at it, and basically said that, essentially it's like it's not really needed. I mean, there's already credits, there's already programs. Builders talking about new construction. Builders are often offering credits anyway.
I think that
$25,000.
the way that it is needed is if it creates an easier avenue for people that are in need of doing this. But the government almost always does not do that. They don't necessarily make it easier. You're taking classes, your programming is longer, you have to prove beyond proof. I think the individual that does all of that should definitely get the 25,000 because it's a lot.
If they put all that to play, that's not how it's being presented. But I mean, we'll see about it. And then the other thing that I think is just really hollow is the government building 3 million new homes in the next 4 years. I don't think I think that needs to happen. I don't think it's going to happen via the federal government. But I do think that I wanted to get your opinion on ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So from my understanding, so we have the housing shortage, and what I'm thinking is that we may need some type of, I don't know if it comes from the federal level to bypass the state and municipal zoning things or zoning laws, but I think that we may need to look into accessory dwelling units for possible increase in housing, because the shortage is really the biggest issue. And that's almost the issue in almost every area. You always have inflated prices if you don't have enough of something too. So I don't know what I mean, everywhere has different laws as far as municipalities, as far as zoning. But I mean, what do you think about the accessory dwelling units? Because if you have some of these lots that are huge, where someone owns a property and they can build a second home, to either rent it or I don't know if they would want to sell it, but probably rent it. I don't know if that would help, but I'm wondering if that's something that we should be looking at.
I think that the development that are happening, right? I think you leave development as far as being able to house a massive amount of people to developers, believe it or not. I think they do a really, really good job of that. But again,
Right.
it really is the difference between, well, what kind of housing shortage are we talking about? Is there a rental housing shortage? I don't think so. I think that there was one a couple of years ago. And I think that as these developments, at least in my area, came to completion, now rents are starting to stabilize because there's just more rentals out there. I think that
Yeah, in certain areas. Right.
the shortage is a home, right?
Right.
Neighborhoods cannot become, you can't start just building all new houses. You literally have to develop um, areas that have that available space in the first place. So I don't know. I think that and again, I don't know too much about this, but I think that in our area, developers really should be the ones, driving this, and
Right.
local government should make sure that we're getting as far as tax dollars as possible. I know we want to encourage these developments, but I think that, the excessive tax abatements that they get, should not be, never ending. But I don't know that there is this housing shortage. I think that there is a desire to be in a home, and single family, there's maybe a shortage in single family homes, right? There may be a shortage there, but that's also exacerbated by the fact that you have a lot of these big these big businesses, buying single family homes for rent, right? Like I saw an article in Atlanta, for example, where that was the case. There was a sign in front of a home, and it wasn't to buy, it was to rent. I think that that is further exacerbating the housing shortage. And I actually find it interesting that we were just having a discussion. We just watched the video with a guy that's saying, don't buy a house. Well, if buying a house is such a bad investment, why are these big businesses buying houses to rent? If it's so
Oh, yeah,
bad,
of course.
if it's something that doesn't make sense, why are they doing that, right?
Well,
So
because they want a nation of renters, and that's the whole thing.
correct.
They really do want a nation of renters, and they're trying to sell that narrative, and that's why I think you have those videos, particularly from people who are multimillionaires who are almost definitely landlords who own doors,
Right.
who want people to be forever
In those
renters.
doors. In those doors.
Yeah, because when they did the if we go back to when they even started the FHA, back to the 40s, if I'm not mistaken, when the proliferation of the suburbs and the single family home, you know, in another video, he talks about how that wasn't what America was. Of course, it wasn't what America was. But when that became what it was, single family homes, that's exactly what drove up the wealth. That's one of the main issues or main things that created that whole middle class was the
Right.
whole FHA. Of course, they did box black people out of that, but that's a whole another conversation.
Well,
But
we all those
but
disclosures.
obviously that was something that owning a home was definitely something that was important, and it was something that people were not running from. It was something they were running to
And it
for
still is.
particular reasons, and it still is. So so it's gonna be interesting to see. Like I said, I'm not excited about those proposals, but I say that to say that I honestly think, and even as far as Donald Trump, he's not touching real estate or hasn't said anything about real estate. But I think that the developers, maybe they need to come up with something for developers, because I don't think the federal government should be necessarily involved in building single family homes. I think it's a little bit weird, but
But that's what I'm
we'll
saying
see.
by understanding what the policy is, right? I don't think that they're going to create a department of, whatever. I think,
No, she literally said we're gonna build 3 million new homes in my first term.
yes, but is it by way of contracting with developers? Like she's a politician making a political speech. So that's why looking at the nitty gritty of the actual policy is, all right, you're saying you're going to build saying I'm going to build 3 million homes is a lot sexier than saying we're going to call all the major developers in the country and we're going to partner with them and we're going to give them incentives to build 3 million homes is too much for America. It's not the bite size that we need,
No,
which is why
I get what
within
you're
the
saying.
policy
I get
is
it.
important. Like, what does she actually mean by that, right? When the government says we're going to fix roads and da 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 da, there isn't a government developer that comes and fixes roads. The government contracts it to people that do that. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like the government is doing it. They're basically saying we're going to have available funding for these things to happen,
Well,
right?
that's the point. I know. There's no disagreement there. I mean, they're not. They're exactly. They're going to contract any and everything out. But the issue is that we're going to have to see where the money comes from, and I think that that goes on both sides. It's not necessarily something that's just a Democratic issue, but I think it's something that America will have to figure out, is where the money will come from, because we do have, we got to look at it and say we have tons of people, and we also have whether people think it's an issue or not. We do have, 15, 20 million people coming into the country also, and they're going to want to live somewhere too. So we were definitely going to have to look at where people are going to be housed and kind of figure that whole thing out. So I think it's going to be interesting with all of what's going on with the rates, the difficulty in buying a home with all the things we're talking about. But I hope that we can figure out a way to, I think that everybody should have an opportunity to buy a home. And I feel that if we can get to a point where people are not only able to afford it, but people are also able to have more choices. Because I think that'll make a better market for people when they're going to buy a home and not sitting here fighting 10 other people just because it's a decent house. We should have enough decent homes, where people can actually buy. So
well, this is also kind of why I don't think that the development aspect of what she's talking about is a bad one, right? In the Northeast, where are you going to build new homes? We don't have the space. So
out here, no, forget about it.
We don't have the space. So you have to take a town that has the space and you have to develop the town and you have to put the investment in there. And then you have to make sure that there's a rail line that goes to and from that little town to wherever most people are going to be working, right? So how do we incentivize people from New York to live in a particular town? You put a train station there. You start developing smaller towns outside of what's already developed. And I think that is a good solution. If what you're saying is it might be a good solution, but I'm concerned politically on where this money is coming from, right? That's a different argument. But is it good for real estate for that to be the case? Yeah, it's good for real estate for it to be the case that there's going to be more homes.
Well, the proposal is great. The proposal is definitely a good thing. I don't think it won't be done in the next 4 years, but I'm hoping that there is some type of incentive for builders to be able to build. And maybe there needs to be a clause that institutional investors can't buy up a bunch of homes. I don't know, but we'll see.
That's tough. I mean, how do you prevent people from buying? You know what I mean?
I know. If you have the money to buy, that's what America is. If you have the money to buy it, you can't stop me from buying it.
Right.
I can buy it and rent it if I want. So,
and it's interesting because I actually think that the gentleman, the video that you showed, he's one of the people that benefits from people, not wanting to purchase homes because let's just say he's someone, and I would not be surprised, that's investing in, a big business and an institution that is buying these single family. There's so many ways that, it makes sense for a millionaire to want people not to rent, to want people not to buy homes.
Yeah, I would always take that with a grain of salt when it coming from, depending on who it's coming from.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time. Of course, we're going to do this again. And enjoy the rest of the Sunday. I know it's
all right, you too.
hard working woman, so you enjoy it. Appreciate you.
Glad you made it.
Yes.